Everyone, we are ready to get started. My name is Jennifer Morse. I am with Madcap Software. I want to thank all of you for joining today as we talk about a fun journey from unstructured FrameMaker documents to DITA XML and a component content management system. Now, I know that might sound like a lot of buzzword bingo. So joining me today to unpack and tell this story is my amazing colleague, Dippo Adjose Coker, product marketing manager here at Madcap Software. So let's face it, change can be challenging. And today Dippo is going to talk us through that process and review some important truths about embarking on a change like this and coming out the other side with awesomeness. It is a different way of thinking and writing about content. So we're going to talk about how to plan for and manage this type of change and some important milestones and factors to consider along the way. Now, before we begin, I just want to review two quick items of business. First, this webinar will be recorded and emailed to everybody. So if you have to pop out early, not to worry, we'll send you a link to the recording. Also, there is a Ask Question panel in the On24 platform here. Would definitely encourage you to ask questions along the way. If there is something that you're curious about that we didn't show in any of the slides, we would love it. So please feel free to ask a question. We'll get to as many as we can at the end. Whatever we can't get to live, we'll certainly follow up with you. So with that, Dippo, welcome once again. I know you have a lot of fun things to cover today, and I'm so happy that you're here with us. It's such an honor. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Thanks a lot, everyone, for joining. And, well, I'll be showing you that everything can be awesome. And I thought I might avoid doing this, but I'll do the everything is awesome. And you're going to have that in your head all through the day, and you're going to remember this. So let's get started. The purpose of the webinar. So it's based on my own personal experience. So I'm going to be telling you a story, and I'm going to be pointing out what happened at what stage and things to look out for in your decision to migrate from FrameMaker to DITA. Now, this same thing will happen no matter what your source content is. So if you're migrating from Word to DITA, you would still have quite a few of the problems and issues and things to look out for during that I'm going to point out to you during this webinar. It will be harder if you're going from Word, though, just as a point of just to know. Just to give you a little bit of background, I used to be a technical writer. I'm now product marketing manager with Madcap Software. I've spent after my MA, 18 odd years writing technical documentation, mostly in regulated fields. So I've worked for financial software and medical devices. And my experience of this migration to DITA was with a medical device company. I'm going to try and avoid naming them. I've not asked for permission to use their name, but most of this holds true. And I have colleagues in other companies who are regulated, and most of what I'm going to be pointing out will be true for them as well. So this is based on a FrameMaker to DITA migration project that I carried out in 2016. When I say I mean a team. So if ever I lapse into the I thing, I'm talking about myself and the entire team that took part in it. And I'm going to be looking at how to plan for and manage change. But first of all, what's the main point of moving from FrameMaker to DITA? Well, FrameMaker is based on a linear print first approach to creating technical documentation. It used to be an industry leader. However, since it was bought by many different systems, it's now owned by Adobe. It's declined in popularity. It's sort of stayed along with the older tools, and it's a dinosaur flailing to keep up with the young guns. The young guns being Madcap Software suite of products. We're allowing you to author in XML, and then we've got the new addition to the family, the Elixir CCMS. FrameMaker is in function a hybrid of Word and InDesign and an SGML XML editor. So it's a strong tool designed to handle complex but long linear documentation. You could do it in a structured fashion or controlled fashion. However, it does not have full capabilities of DITA XML and the open standard that guides that particular flavor of XML. The principal difference compared to DITA is the level of granularity that can be successfully managed. So a DITA-based system is able to provide version control, is able to provide auditable change reports, link management, and a host of other issues that we were having with FrameMaker documents. Now, while it's a powerful tool, there's still challenges to its use with organizations, and especially when the organizations get to a certain size. But let's look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of FrameMaker. So for the writer, you've got robust formatting options. Wide range. FrameMaker offers a wide range of formatting options, making it easy for writers to create complex technical documentation using consistent styles and formatting. However, the issue with this approach is that the author has control over too many publishing options. The author can decide whether he wants to center align his table, put pictures on the left, put captions at the bottom or at the top. So that then starts going away from what might be a company style guide and all of that sort of stuff. When you do spot it, it's usually too late, and then you're just going to push out. So content authoring supports authoring for large, but like I said, mainly linear content. Multilingual support. You can translate content that you've created in FrameMaker. If you couldn't, it wouldn't have worked. It would never have got off the ground. However, in order to do that, you must convert your frame files, frame documents to MIF files. And that entails a whole process, just not even counting the time that it takes to perform that conversion. You have to sit twiddling your thumbs at your computer, but you're starting to add too many things to your process. So you convert to MIF and then you send that to the translation agency. With DITA files, the documents are already in a text-based format, and so there's fewer transformations required before being able to be absorbed into a translation management system. Let's talk about the learning curve for the writer. The FrameMaker has a steeper learning curve. And even if you compare it to having to learn DITA, with certain tools, if you look at the Ixios CCMS web author interface, you can so very quickly get started and running and still be held within the constraints that DITA imposes on you, compared to having to learn FrameMaker from scratch. There's so many buttons, there's so many different pods and panels, and Adobe goes about changing the interface every 3.5 months, and you find yourself looking for what button does what. Complexity. While it can handle certain levels of complexity, it can also be a drawback in that it's not able to easily show you all the different variants that you want to see. It's not as straightforward a tool as when you have something that has been integrated within a CCMS and is able to provide a clear and unique writing interface for the authors and for SMEs as well. Because remember, your SMEs, you might want them to be able to contribute to content. Well, there's no way they're going to be able to do anything. I've never heard of an SME picking up a copy of FrameMaker and actually making the change, apart from the fact that you'd have to install a copy on their PC, buy a license, and all of that sort of stuff. It's just not geared towards that sort of usage. And then there's the heavy lift for PCs during publication. I remember we would basically time our publications to coincide with lunchtime. So I'd hit the publish button and then head off to lunch. I live in France, so lunches are an hour and a half. And by the time we come back, we might just have that publication. For the heavier manuals, we would leave it until the end of the day and get the computer to run it overnight. In one particular case, we had to actually have a dedicated computer, which we called our server. It wasn't really a server, but it's just a computer that did nothing else but publish. For the business, well, FrameMaker produces high quality print ready documents. Yeah, fair enough. That's brilliant. That's what it's geared to do. However, when dealing with technical content that requires different formats, HTML transformations, different web help projects, and so on, then you can start getting a different look depending on what you're publishing to. You've not got that central publication engine or publication style guides that control all publications, no matter who it was that wrote it. There's a heavy initial investment. There's a cost of purchasing licenses for FrameMaker, and it's a license per person. There's no way really of sharing apart from sharing a computer. And as such, after a certain number of users, then it just doesn't make sense to keep buying licenses. And then FrameMaker gets an update, like I said, every 3.5 months. Okay, I'm exaggerating, but they do get updates. And at some point, usually there'll be an update where older versions of we had this particular scenario where some content was created in FrameMaker 8, and by the time we'd been archived, but that product got resurrected, and we had to open it with FrameMaker 12. It was impossible. We had to go through a conversion process, convert it into MIF, and then bringing it over into 12. And the FrameMaker 8 will definitely not open FrameMaker 12 documents. With DITA, you have no such problem. Even when the standard evolves, we're at DITA 1.3 now, you got to DITA 2.0. While there might be deprecated elements, there's nothing to stop your publication from at least opening. And then there are various tools that help you refactor and make sure that your content is upgraded automatically to the latest version of DITA. So you've got one of the massive points of contention with our use was collaboration, limited collaboration features. There's really nothing integrated within FrameMaker that allows you to easily share content for review. You'd have to create a publication and send that PDF off for that review. So, and creating the content I've mentioned, your SMEs are not going to want to be touching FrameMaker. So that's pretty much my advantages and disadvantages that I found while I was working with this medical device practitioner. So let me give you a little bit of background on that. So it's a brief overview of working with FrameMaker in the medical device industry. So I worked in the mammography department of a medical device manufacturer. In 2014, we made a decision, or it was made by the higher ups, to move to a more efficient authoring system. With the number of products that were increasing, the agile teams moving to an agile development methodology, the complexity of delivery increased with demands from different regions. Some regions would want certain features available. Some regions have to have certain content. If we take, for example, ROHS for China, we had a problem with an issue with Japan where because clinical trials hadn't been performed on the equipment with the Japanese population, at the moment of release, we found we couldn't market that particular feature, that new option to that market. And so it was like a last minute scramble to rework the FrameMaker files, take out all the references to that new feature. And it was just one hell of a headache. If you multiply that by the number of modalities, multiply the number of products, the number of regions we have to serve, the number of features that were coming out for each of the products, multiply that by the number of modalities across healthcare. So I was in mammography, there's vascular, there's AWS, and then in the States, we got many more modalities over there. And it's sort of if we wanted to be able to keep something that was consistent in look, consistent in terminology, and consistent in the rate of creation of publications, we had to move to something else. The team, we had minimum of 5 writers per modality. So there were 3 major modalities in France, more in the US and in other European countries. And acquisitions by the medical device company meant that we were always adding more writers. There were new features, new equipment that was being added to the family of products. And as such, those writers were not necessarily, they had their own style guides, they were not necessarily going along with the main style guide that we were following. So if we look at it, things were just becoming more and more complicated to harmonize content, to make sure that it was always compliant, and to also ease the burden on translation. And like talking about which translations became increasingly difficult. Without the structured approach, similar content was being recreated. People were copy and pasting files rather than performing one of the reuse mechanisms, even that FrameMaker offers. Part of this was due to the ownership of types of files, you know, so somebody had got used to writing service manuals, and so for them, service manuals for this product, and anytime there was a new feature, anything happened, it was that writer that would do it. And so people got used to, like, you know, these are my files. And when they'd go on holiday, they would not, you know, easily make those available to everyone. So it was increasing copy and paste of content as opposed to reusing. Technical writers became specialists in their type of content and their product, you know, which is not really conducive to having a writing pool. Regarding compliance, well, we had an issue where someone had changed one FrameMaker file that was actually being reused across other variants of the file. Now, what happened was all this went through, everyone reviewed, published the document, only it was spotted out in the field. And that caused a whole kerfuffle because we had to, like, you know, stop all the documentation, production, and all of that sort of stuff, and re-release everything at a great cost because a lot of these manuals were actually printed. Now, a report by the Cara team pointed to a lack of training and the tools used. One of the short-term remedies that I put in place then was to put in place an SVN system. So I installed SVN with Tortoise as the client and retrained all the staff in using it. It worked in a large part. However, a lot of my time was starting to get taken up with more and more SVN issues as the system was used increasingly by more people. As new people joined, I'd have to update the instructions. Sometimes the link changed as to where it was. We had problems with IP addresses, and with an SVN system installed on one computer, the IP address to address that SVN was a unique one. Can't make it floating. So it was just getting too complex. And every time we had to update SVN as well, it meant downtime for the users because I had to send out a notification. Everyone had to check in their stuff. I'd perform the update and then send out a message for people to, like, you know, continue. Only there's always one or two people in there that would not have followed, or, you know, all the instructions, or maybe they had an urgency and they had to, like, you know, work on it. And so we had SVN conflicts. I don't know if you've used SVN before, but managing the conflicts can be quite complex, especially when you don't know what happened to cause that particular conflict. And so the decision to move to a CCMS would handle a lot of these issues. It would handle collaboration. It would handle versioning. It would handle link management. I've not even really talked about that. I'm going to come to that maybe a little bit later. It was a welcome relief. And basically, you had all the things that SVN could do, but it was being handled automatically by a CCMS. So the decision to migrate, I think if you haven't picked it up from there, I'm just going to quickly go over it here. And so it's like complex documentation. Medical device product lines were expanding, complexities for documentation, interrelated information. It was becoming a burden for FrameMaker. Regulatory compliance, as the example I showed you, releasing something that had an error in it is not something that regulated industry can afford. You get 1, 2, 3 of those, and, like, you know, you get a heavy strikeout by the FDA or any other regulatory authorities. Medical device have the stringent regulatory documentation requirements, I think, apart from pharma, which is up there as well. And so having a more foolproof way to ensure compliance was critical in making that decision. And DITA's capabilities for metadata and tagging presented a compelling case for that to be able to, and like, the reuse mechanism and so on. Localization and translation was another reason. Our products are global, and translation into multiple languages was becoming time-consuming and expensive with FrameMaker. DITA promised a more efficient localization process and the ability to also just share little snippets of what has changed. And because of the way DITA is written, you have smaller topics. If you change one word there, you only send off a text file that has maybe 50 to 100 words in it, 2 paragraphs at the most. And that is easier to manage going in and out from different systems than an entire big FrameMaker file where you had to publish a PDF, highlight the differences for the translation department. Team collaboration, being able to work on the same content at the same time within a CCMS environment, basically just like trumped anything that we could have put in place with Adobe FrameMaker. The cost over time, managing and updating FrameMaker files was rising. The cost-benefit analysis suggested a move to DITA would be more economical in the long run, and especially as we were having to keep sometimes hold of old FrameMaker licenses and continue paying for maintenance on those, as well as like, the newer formats, and we're never sure what formats anyone's using at another modality. Our goals and expectations from the migration was to have improved reusability. One of the primary goals was to make content more modular and more reusable. And so we'd be able to write once and publish everywhere, and change once and change everywhere. Enhanced collaboration, so improved version control and having people in the same system and being able to perform reviews using the system was another thing that was high on our list. Streamlined localization, compliance confidence, making sure that we met industry and internal standards was a non-negotiable deal. And I mentioned like the long-term savings. I'm sure any managers in there mentioned savings. That's the main thing. And you make your savings in time that the technical authors spend in like looking for content, updating the content, publishing the content, which takes quite a long time, and the back and forth of the translation management workflow. So I like to compare DITA versus FrameMaker using a Lego analogy, and that's where the title of this presentation came up. It's everything is awesome when you move over to DITA, because FrameMaker is difficult to modify and reuse content, whereas DITA is to Lego as FrameMaker is to Duplo. So if you look at the granularity of content, the Lego blocks on there, that's the more complicated house at the top, are meant to be assembled in numerous ways. And anyone that's played with Lego knows that you build what's on the picture of the box, and then afterwards you can take it out and build something else. You don't even always have to follow the structure of the box. However, certain pieces would only fit certain places because they're designed for use in that place. So if you imagine your content, you're able to reuse content as and when you want. But the structure of DITA, the standard, means that you can't insert a concept into a task, for example. It prevents you. So you can't put a roof brick on the ground and expect for it to fit properly. Stability versus flexibility. So Duplo is all about maintaining stability as you remove blocks around. It's meant for the younger user. So, they're a bit more clumsy and they can build large things. However, DITA with the Lego analogy means that you're able to easily change things around and the structure still remains stable. I could remove all my gray bricks from in there and insert red bricks in there, structure would still remain stable. And while I was removing it, pretty much you could remove all the corner pieces from that building, from that house, and replace it without having to take down the whole house. With a Duplo, you'd have to take down pretty much all of it. Content reusability, I've already just mentioned that, so you can use your gray tiles that we use for the corner piece to create the chimney, for example, that chimney that you see on the side. And complexity. As you can see on there, Duplo allows you to create that nice, colorful house, but Lego, because of the smaller modular nature of the pieces, you were able to build that beautiful house with a garage and even the car, and you've got plants and everything on there. So this is sort of to emphasize the risk and limitations of making changes in FrameMaker files. If you pull out a Duplo block, the house could tumble, versus the modular and flexible nature of DITA, and breaks, and it'll still remain stable. I won't mention link management there. That'd be stretching the analogy too far. Okay, so let's look at a little bit about granularity and reusability. And on the top left up there, you can see reusability. A yellow brick is a topic, and it's able to be used as the third topic on the left, and as the chapter header of a document on the right. If you look at the way topics are built, you first of all have the typing aspect of DITA, which means that before you start creating your content, you want to identify what type of content is it, because that then allows you to easily reuse the content, but also easily create the content and apply rules for certain content groups. So tasks have different rules from concepts, have different rules from references. So granularity, modular content, DITA allows you to break information down into smaller reusable components called topics. And they could be assembled in various combinations to create different kinds of manuals. And because that content is modular, it's also very flexible. Reusability, DITA offers you conditional text, content references, and manages your links, allows you to include or exclude certain pieces of content based on predefined conditions, allows you to reference the same piece of content in multiple places and make sure that they're automatically updated when it changes in one. Your link management, the use of indirect linking in DITA as a reuse mechanism allows you to manage your content across, allows you to move content from one place to the other, even rename files without losing that link. If you do accidentally delete a document at publication, you get a report that allows you to easily identify areas where you might have broken links, and you can go back and fix it. And because of version control in there, you could easily restore something that you just deleted by mistake. Multi-channel publishing, output flexibility allows, DITA content allows you to publish in an infinite number of formats. HTML, PDF, EPUB, those are the common ones. But then you also are now able to push to content delivery systems that allow you to dynamically deliver content to the user based on their profile. You can use it to train your AI and use it for chatbot answers. If your answers are short and concise, and understandable within that particular topic, then your chatbot is not spitting out 6 paragraphs of answers to you. It's giving you the precise answer that you've asked. I've mentioned collaboration and version control many times. I won't go over that again. There's metadata and tagging. Because it's XML based, it allows for a richer metadata and semantic tagging, improving discoverability and the organization of content. But like I said, we're in a new age. Everyone's talking AI now. How do you train AI? With structured content, and not just structured content, but structured content that has semantics indicating where used, what it replies to. I mean, your metadata can apply to pretty much anything. And that means you're able to train your large language model a lot better than if you're just dumping everything in a Word format into it. Scalability is another important aspect. For large-scale documentation, DITA is better suited to large-scale documentation than your CCMS is able to handle millions of objects and a lot better than any human would be able to. Easier localization and translation, cost effectiveness of translations. I won't beat a dead horse, I've already mentioned it. And there's like governance and compliance. So standardization, DITA being an open standard, it makes it easier to ensure compliance with various industry regulations and internal and also internal guidelines. You're able to create a specialization of your DITA that will be able to export or fill in forms that are required for an FDA submission, for a financial disclosure submission. I've seen so many interesting use cases of how DITA is able to like push the right content to the right place at the right time and do it very easily. And being an open standard means that DITA can work well with a range of other tools. The standards out there, it's open, there's a committee, you could join the DITA technical committee and help contribute towards like, creating new standards or defining the future for the DITA standard. Now, our initial planning and managing change, our initial plan for migration. Our project timeline, after looking at the number of documents we had, the estimated duration was like 12 to 18 months, given the complexity of, medical device documentation, the variants, and so on. Management wanted it done in 3 months, in 1 quarter, but as writers and project managers, we could see like details that they couldn't see and the scope of work involved in that migration. Eventually, it took 12 months before our initial documents went into production once we started that migration process. Now, this involved having a change in strategy, and rather than going for converting everything and going live with everything all at the same time, we eventually ended up prioritizing one manual and its variants to test the robustness of the conversion tools and also to test like the quality assurance measures that we were putting in place. We gradually fine-tuned that over the first 2 or 3 iterations. And once we were done with this, we were able to then apply that rule to convert the rest of the content. If you look at the stakeholder involvement, you've got to make sure that you identify your key stakeholders, both internal and external. So that includes your writers, your managers, your IT staff, project managers, and so on. Engineering managers had to have a buy-in there. But also, you've got external stakeholders who is hosting your website. You might have to involve them to make sure that they're ready for the change that you're about to impose on them. So change management strategies include communication. You've got to be open and you've got to have continuous communication with all your stakeholders. You've got to have regular updates. You've got to hold town halls. You've got to send out newsletters, emails, just to keep everyone informed. At the company I used to work for, we had Yammer, which I don't know if that still exists. It's a Microsoft tool, but we were able to post information on there and have a portal and kind of a knowledge base for anyone to go in, look up answers that had been answered before, look for the plan, where we're going with it, progress on the conversion, and so on. We also ran pilot tests on a smaller project before the full-scale migration to iron out any kinks and make the necessary adjustments. We included in those pilot testing were feedback loops. So creating channels for easy feedback from all team members so that the SME can say like, look, that doesn't look right because this is wrong and that is wrong. We've got to make sure. And so when you're designing the style sheet, you're also keeping into account what the final output is going to look like, and that it's going to be accepted by the audience. Risk mitigation is very important, especially in regulated industry. So preparing contingency plans for potential roadblocks, such as data loss, issues with compliance. We actually put in place a dual writing process. So during the time that we were converting, we sent the latest version off for conversion. However, that means that that document is kind of blocked. So we continued writing in FrameMaker, and then any updates that were made in FrameMaker were also made to the local version of the DITA files once we started receiving those. And then we used, once put into the CCMS, we use that to manage the change. So initial version came in, and any changes before we went live, we were able to just version the documents. And that way we had a trace of what was happening from the time it got into the CCMS. Issues that we face and tackle, there's always a resistance to change. As with any significant change, like, there's always going to be some people who are not exactly happy. And some of it is quite legitimate worries. They're comfortable with FrameMaker, or they're worried that, this might actually take longer, or maybe they've heard bad stories about, like, other implementations and so on. So you've got to be able to, and that's where communication comes in. You've got to be able to communicate and make sure that you are addressing any of those little points of resistance. So we addressed this by having one-to-one meetings using the Yammer board, but also having a champion. You need a project champion, someone who's in there, who is in favor and who understands the changes that you're trying to make, and is able to empathize and answer questions and talk to other users of the system. There's the issue of the initial cost of what we thought it would cost to do the migration versus what it actually costs. These are things that you'll only learn with practice, but just know that whatever figure that you quoted for the conversion of your files and so on, you've got to think and maybe add a certain percentage for iterations, for trial and error, because nothing ever goes in technology, nothing ever goes straight through the first time you try it. We had issues with compliance and with technical. Well, who's going to install the system? Are we installing a SaaS system? Where the server is going to be based? But also in compliance, how are we going to ensure that whatever we migrated, all the content that we took over from FrameMaker and put into DITA, how are we sure we've not lost a comma somewhere? A comma can be very important in that, for example, if you're only allowed to apply 6 units of radiation and 6.7, and the comma goes, the full stop goes after, and you apply 67, well, then you've just irradiated someone unnecessarily. So by meticulously planning and adopting effective change management strategies, staying agile to tackle issues, we navigated this complex journey. And while it was challenging, it was also a transformative experience that positioned the medical device company well for the future. Also positioned me nicely to eventually become a product marketing manager. So onboarding, that's another issue that you must make sure that you tackle. Team onboarding and handling resistance. I've mentioned resistance a little bit earlier on, but educating the team is not just about teaching them DITA. You've got to have a training plan that is multifaceted. You've got to approach it from different angles. So you've got to train the team in DITA, but you've also got to train them in using a content management system. There's a different methodology. We were lucky here because having used SVN just before, writers had got used to checking in and checking out documents, the idea of locking documents, and the idea that the documents were stored in this case, replicated repository, but we could look at it as a central repository and anyone could have access to that. We started with the basics of DITA training, so things like XML tagging, topic types, metadata. There's loads of websites out there, and we employed consultants to help us with that. So we put in train the trainer programs, and so it's one person that receives the full training and training on how to train others, and that person then goes back into the company and trains their peers. We also had to look at a cultural way of a cultural shift, basically a different way of writing. employees had to adapt to the concept of no longer owning their content. Content has become a shared experience, managed centrally through a CCMS where documents were checked in and checked out. You had to have a content strategy consultancy. And so we employed the services of very large consultancy services that run conferences all the time. And this is their job. And so they were able to help develop a long-term strategy for the company and also help with that, with all the training. In dealing with resistance, I mentioned having champions selected within each modality. We were, as champions, encouraged to attend data conferences, both in person and online, and we're then communicating with all the stakeholders and actors, letting them know what to expect from the system and dispelling myths about this system. Usually, resistance is the result of a misunderstanding. The clearer things are described, the easier change is. So the conversion strategy, I'm sort of running behind here, but we had to decide also between a manual conversion and outsourcing to a consultancy. Depending on the volume and complexity of your content, it might be better to outsource to a conversion consultancy. And one of the advantages of doing that is that that consultancy is able to do a content audit. They're able to dive into the migration process and look at your existing files and give indications of where you can reuse, where you can better use variables. And having that overall view of your content by an external provider is always a good thing. So we use context services for the consultancy side of things, and DCL, another of our partners, they harmonize a tool to scan existing files and help identify areas of reuse before they actually started converting the content. Translations. Now, this is where the promise was that translations would become cheaper, and this was the area where you could see the first short-term gains. In the long run, and in certain cases, this is immediately true. You get translation savings straight away. However, in our case, due to the structure of our FrameMaker files, translation segments and the way that the translation management system chunks content for FrameMaker files was vastly different from anything that DITA was going to deliver. So our first translation request for one of the manuals came at the price of a full document translation. You can imagine the engineering managers were not at all happy with this, and so eventually managed to talk them down and show them that in the long term, there are savings to be made. However, in the future, we might have handled that in a different way. Dealing with retranslation, that sort of the unexpected issues that occur, like what I've just said, in that the initial price was really high, but also the fact that we had to set up different ways of communicating with our translation agencies. They had to have an ability to build PDFs, and that being lacking in the particular CCMS that we chose, not Ixia CCMS, we found that we as authors had to always generate the PDFs and send them back and so on for the proofreading. Compliance. Now, compliance re-verification and revalidation was another of the major challenges that we had. Because of the change in the documentation process, all content had to be re-verified for compliance. Like I said, you cannot afford a misplaced full stop in your content. And in some cases, we even had to revalidate. Verification is the process of checking that you have complied with the requirements that were stated. Validation means that you verifying that you've built the right device. And in such in our industry, you have to have procedures that an engineer can follow, and they have to be sure that they're able to follow that job card from beginning to end and sign off on it. We introduced, we suggested a change from a PDF output to HTML. You know that when you're creating HTML output, you try to reduce scrolling on the pages. And as such, what we tried to do was to create logical units and logical pauses in the in a 30-step procedure, for example. The engineers did not like that at all. Why? Because they were used to like that scrolling, and they scroll until they see the next chapter and they know that they've finished the procedure. If you have a page where, like, you know, the 30 procedure or HTML page where you have 30 procedures spread over three clicks, then it could be a source of an error. And so we had to work again with the engineers and find different ways of chunking that content. We had to tweak search parameters in the content delivery tool so that we're able to better search for part numbers, we're able to search for different aspects and not just the default ones. So what lessons did we learn? What would we have done differently in hindsight? Well, understanding the principal one was understanding the implications for translation, and we would have preferred a different strategy for it. Maybe it would have been better for us to have converted the translated FrameMaker files rather than trying to retranslate the English source files. We would have paid the cost on to the conversion agency, but that was actually running cheaper than getting it reread and re-verified by a translation agency. I will say one thing: choose your vendors very, very carefully. Most vendors will promise the moon, just like, you know, get their foot in the door. Make sure that they can demonstrate use cases of whatever promises have been made. Prepare a sample project. Let your prospective vendor use that sample project to demo their system. It's easy to spot inconsistencies when you're looking at familiar content, as opposed to looking at a manual for planting flowers in your garden. Don't be afraid to push back on those promises. And anything that is essential, that is marked essential on your list of requirements, must not be part of a future hot fix on the part of the vendor. Either it exists already, or you will find another vendor that can provide it. So either software can do it or it cannot. Promises, we had many, many promises, and this is like 6 to 8 years down the line. There's still some of them that still have not been met. Be prepared to do your migration in phases, iterating and improving instructions and matrices as each phase completes. That way you're learning from yourself and you're iterating, you're becoming better. And then once that first initial phase is over, do a post-mortem, pick up all your learnings, and then apply it to phase 2, where you've increased the number of manuals or maybe the number of variants and so on. Do not expect not to have a cleanup process. I know I use many negatives in that phrase, but it's difficult to phrase it otherwise. Basically, you will have cleanup to do. Unless you've had robots writing for you, there are bound to be inconsistencies in the application of your previous style guides. And as such, there's no way to provide for an automated conversion of files with all the different exceptions that could be per author. Make sure you have a champion on your team. Document the migration process so that you're able to, one, learn from it, use it as your part of your post-mortem, but also pass it on to other people for other departments that might want to use it. It also gives you something to fall back on 10 years down the line when you're looking at what happened during the migration, why was it done in this way. That documentation is able to provide those answers. One or more, you need to have one or more data information architects, and you need to have content strategies helping you to put all the pieces together as they have the experience to look at what is it that you want to do and where is it that you want to go, and they're able to better help you plan for that. Your content strategy is not just where should we put it and should we create a PDF. It's also what are the other types of content? How do you apply your taxonomy to this? What are the impacts of doing this if we're going to want to go in that particular direction? And last but not least, accept that perfect is the enemy of done. You will never get it perfect the first time around. You will just need to accept what you have and improve on it and make those gradual improvements. And that's it. That's where I am now. The company has moved on, and they were so successful actually in the reuse and in making sure that and in reducing the workload and in the speed of delivery that a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, they reduced the number of staff on there because they found that going DITA was so much more effective in creating content than the FrameMaker process. And that's it. Thank you very much. I'll remind you.
Yeah. Thank you, Dippo. Yeah, just real quick, we have just a question that came in that actually was asked a few times, so it was perfect. So we'll repeat this for everyone. But just as a reminder for you all, we do have our conference happening October 8th through the 11th here in beautiful San Diego. There is a discount when you register by August 31st, excuse me. You can save up to $400 on the registration. And you can come in person, which we would love to have you, or you can join us at home, which is also another option if you're not able to travel. So lots of great sessions for all different skill sets and different subject matter. So we hope to see you there. It's a fantastic event. So just wanted to remind everybody. There are a couple questions that came in. So just going to repeat some of them. Mm-hmm. So one was kind of interesting. You mentioned, if you're doing Word or et cetera, but what if you are coming from Microsoft Word? Are the considerations the same? Mm-hmm. Do we kind of realize the same awesomeness when we go through it? I mean, we could probably spend an hour on that, but what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, you'll experience even more awesomeness because Word is a terrible tool for technical writing. However, most of the steps are pretty much the same. One of the things that would be more difficult is trying to map for an automatic conversion, trying to map word styles to DITA elements, because Word just allows anyone to do anything, so inline formatting, even if you expressly forbid it, there's no way of stopping it. However, with FrameMaker, there are some mechanisms in there that will sort of prevent you from using too much inline formatting. Without the training, though, you could end up doing as bad on FrameMaker as Word.
Right. So in other words, try to wrangle a little bit of the Wild West that can be Word, right? No way around that. That's just the way it is. So perhaps... Yep. Maybe as better as if we're going to do a migration, and I think this is actually a tool independent thing anyways. When you go from something like Word, I think to a semi-structured or a super structured world, I think the better formed the Word document is, the better go you're going to have anyway, right? Yep. I think schema independent problem, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So I think you're right. You can't really avoid some of the rogueness of Word, but I think that making sure the documents are as well formed as possible and using styles as much as possible is important. Would you agree?
Yeah. And you'd probably, I would even actually make it a 2-step cleanup process. You clean up before you send for conversion. You start looking for everywhere in your document where you've not used an official style. And then you'd have the normal cleanup after.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, and that kind of leads to another question that came in, actually, a nice segue. More of a mechanical question for you, Dippo, but can you comment a little bit on that style migration process? I know you kind of touched on it a little bit in the presentation and just now as we're considering going from something like Word or Frame to a structured approach. Can you comment a little bit on how do you how should we think about mapping those styles for the DITA conversion? What's that process like?
Yeah.
And is it a one-to-one, or is there a there? What's going on?
It's an iterative, as with anything, it's an iterative process. You start off with an Excel file, and you start off listing all your. Okay, I'm looking at FrameMaker here. All your topics. So you would say, for example, that all your chapters should be mapped to a submap. But inside of a chapter, you have files, FrameMaker files making up that chapter. So for each of those files, what you want to do is, first of all, type the file. Now, DITA stands for Darwin Information Typing Architecture. It's applying information mapping to your content. And so with the main styles that the main types that you have with DITA, concepts, references, tasks, and troubleshooting, and then there's glossaries and so on. What you want to do, first of all, is identify for each topic that it's a concept or it's a reference. That's step one. Once you've done that, then you create rules for how do I identify a task when the machine is running through it. The title might not be explicit enough. I've got titles that start off with how to. Okay, yeah, I can say that that's probably going to be a procedure. But then I've got other starts like measurement with. That doesn't tell me anything. So we created rules to say that, okay, well, if you come across anything that is a numbered list, it's most likely going to be a task. So convert that to a task. That then gets pushed over to the conversion agency. And what you're creating is what you call an annotated topic list. You're annotating topic types, and they're running it through their matrix, through their converter, and giving you feedback and say, okay, well, we found this number of topics. We've identified them as this particular type, and these are the subtypes. And inside of it, you've got these that are going to be mapped to the DITA elements. Take a look at it, correct what's wrong, and we'll run it through again. And by the time you do 2 or 3 iterations of that, with FrameMaker, because you've got more consistent styling, you can go with that and use that to convert the rest of your documentation. You can fine-tune that ATL, go back and forth as many times as you want. But like I said, you'll never get to the point of being able to mass convert 87 odd manuals, that we had. We had 5 products, and I miscalculated that. 5 products, 3 service manuals of 3 proprietary types, a pre-installation manual, an installation manual, an OM operator manual, an OM extract, which is an extract of that, so reuse in that. However, they were being treated as separate files. Quality control manual and quality control forms, that's another subset. And so you add all those up, we had about 40 odd manuals that we had to convert. And in the meantime, there was more variants coming out, more versions coming out. So I hope that answered that question about annotated topic lists. It's basically creating that initial map with your conversion provider that's going to start identifying, using basic rules, types of topics, and then that you're able to then map those elements to so numbered lists, for example, is always a step. If you have bullet points in it, most likely you're describing something or you're making a reference. If it's got a table in it, it's a reference, because tables are meant for that, to refer to it for information. It's not nobody uses tables just to read. Nobody reads in table formats. I hope that answered that question.
Yeah, very helpful. I think it all ties back to a good content audit. I have a feeling that when you're coming from something else like Word or Frame, there's probably a lot of great content in there already. It's just different, yep. Right? Then it's structured differently. So sometimes maybe, and I think it's appropriately named, with Darwin, which is everything evolves, right? It's an iterative process yep. With the conversion and how you're going to do it. Like you might be used to your long chapter-based writing world, like in Word or Frame, and you almost have to take a look at the sections or the chapters that you know about in the Word and Frame world and break them down and try to identify, okay, well, chapter 3 is made up of, really, if we look at chapter 3 in its entirety, it's made up of these two procedures and these two reference sections, right? So how do we
Mm-hmm.
break those out, and how would we identify those and make them components really?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Well, very helpful. Thank you, Dippo, for this. I know we're right
Yeah.
at time, so I want to be mindful
We're
of
just
that.
right at time. I see there's one last question on there. I'll
Oh
just
yeah.
remind anyone, like, we've got your email addresses when you registered. If there's any questions that we've not answered, I'll be happy to, like,
Yes.
send you something, and any particular ones in there, I'll make sure I get, like, as much information to you as possible.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks everybody for joining. Thanks for everybody's engagement. I hope this was helpful. Dippo, thanks for this great insight and the fun story. And we hope to see you on another presentation. And please get in touch with us if you have questions about this type of thing and you're thinking about embarking on this kind of journey in your own world. We'd love to chat and see if we can help through and talk through some of those scenarios. So please reach out if we can help there. So thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks again, Dippo. And we hope to see
Thanks a
you on
lot.
another presentation soon. Have a great
I'll
rest of
definitely
the week
be
and
there.
weekend.
If not, I'll see you at Mad World.
That's right. We'll see you there. Thanks, everybody. Have a great one.
Thanks. Bye.